In this lesson, you'll learn what seller financing is and how it can help you secure property for little money down and/or make a nice steady cash flow over time. As usual, take a minute to print out the workbook section for this lesson and get a pen or pencil to take notes. Seller financing can be a great way for a credit-challenged buyer to secure a property without having to deal with a bank. As a result, seller financing is often more common during downtimes in the real estate cycle. On the seller side, if one of your long-term goals as an investor is to have a portfolio of performing assets, you can have a monthly cash flow secured by real estate by offering seller financing. Seller financing can be a great exit strategy as well. When you have completed this guide, you will be better able to consider offering seller financing to buyers and securing seller financing for your own real estate purchases. Before you start this lesson, make sure that you know the following: basic principles and terminology used in real estate investing, which properties to look for and why, where you want to start buying real estate, how to locate motivated sellers, a basic understanding of cash flow investment strategies, and basic understanding of creating and maintaining a cash flow buyers list. After you diligently apply all of the principles and concepts in this lesson, you should come away from this lesson knowing the following: understand seller financing, know the difference between advantages and challenges, know when to apply the strategy, understand the different types of profiles, understand the mechanics of seller financing, and understand using the different contracts in seller financing.
Here is a tip for success in dealing with seller financing. You need to protect your interest. We recommend that you record your seller financing in the courthouse as a lien to provide proof that a transaction took place between the two parties. This protects the buyer from the seller claiming they did not have any rights to the property or that the contract never did exist. When you sign your security instrument before a notary or closing agent and then record it in the public land records, you create a lien that secures your debt to the property. If a seller finance deal is not secured to the real estate, the position of the lien, as the seller, can be jeopardized if someone files a lien before you. Because liens are paid off by priority, see the public records lesson and guide for more information. By recording the lien in the courthouse, you will be paid in the order of the liens recorded against the property in the case of foreclosure. However, if tax liens have been filed against the property, the tax liens will take first position ahead of all other liens filed. The position of other liens is dictated by the date they were filed. One word of caution: be careful if you, as the seller, have an underlying loan that has a due on sale clause in it, which is very common, meaning that the lender then has the right to call in the loan if they perceive that the property has been transferred from one party to another or sold. It is generally not in your best interest to have this happen, so take measures to protect the due on sale clause from being triggered. A trust or limited liability corporation, LLC, are ways to help protect the underlying loan from being called due. Have an attorney set up a trust or LLC where it identifies who has rights to what and transfer the property into the trust or LLC.
Seller financing is financing extended by a seller, instead of a bank, to a buyer. Instead of making payments to the bank, the buyer makes payments, interest and/or principal, to the seller, and is approved by the seller instead of the bank. With seller financing, the buyer and seller agree on price, interest rate, and terms. Sellers who offer financing can choose to create their own documents or use an attorney to create the documents and close the deal. And last but not least, the seller, like a bank, usually keeps a lien or legal right to the property in the event that the buyer discontinues payments. Traditional financing is not the only way to purchase a property. When the mortgage or lending industry tightens up on their loan requirements, home buyers often have a tougher time finding mortgage money, which also means sellers can have a tougher time finding buyers who qualify for a traditional loan. With seller financing, the seller stays more involved with the home's purchase and gives up obtaining a lump sum of cash from the sale of the home. Instead, they are able to find a buyer more quickly than with traditional loans. The seller is rewarded for their compromise by being given top dollar for the property along with a nice monthly cash flow. Seller financing can thus be a win-win for both parties. In seller financing, the seller and the buyer are bound by a contract that allows the seller to foreclose in the event of non-payment. Seller financing usually uses 3 contracts to solidify the deal. 1, a purchase and sales agreement to buy the property. 2, a security instrument to secure the debt of the property, which can be a mortgage, trust deed, or deed of trust. And 3, a loan document called a promissory note that secures the right to receive payments.
Here's a brief example to illustrate a typical seller finance deal. If a property sale price is $100,000 and the buyer gives the seller $10,000 cash, the agent's fee will be deducted from this down payment. The seller then finances the balance, $90,000, after all the contracts are signed. The buyer takes possession of the property and pays the seller instead of the bank for the term listed in their sales contract.
Seller financing is carried out most commonly in one of 2 ways. The first way is for the seller to take back a mortgage on the house. The buyer signs both a promissory note promising to repay the loan and either a mortgage or a deed of trust, allowing the seller to foreclose if the buyer fails to pay. In return, the seller signs a deed transferring title to the buyer or transfers title to a trustee for a deed of trust. Because the buyer or trustee holds the title, the buyer can sell the house or refinance, but the buyer must keep making the agreed-upon payments to the seller until they sell. This technique is used on properties that the buyer wants to live in or sell and offers the buyer a lot of flexibility and options. It most commonly occurs when the seller owns the property outright. Please note that modifications to this type of transaction are needed if the seller has an underlying loan. A well-versed real estate attorney can help you set up this correctly. The second way is for the seller to keep title to the property for as long as it takes you to pay off the loan. The contract the buyer and seller sign is known by various names, including contract for deed, contract of sale, land contract, or installment sales contract. The second method works like this. The contract states that the seller will keep title to the property until the buyer pays off the loan. The buyer normally buys the loan off in a series of regular payments similar to a standard mortgage. After the buyer pays off the entire loan, the seller signs a deed transferring title to the buyer. Because the seller keeps the title over the life of the loan, the seller cannot sell or refinance the property until all payments are made and the title is transferred, which is an obvious reason for the unpopularity of these contracts. This technique is used on properties the buyer intends to hold on to for a long time. In some cases, it is also used for buyers who plan on living at the property for a long time.
There are both advantages and challenges to seller financing. As far as advantages go, it's a well-kept secret, but every day thousands of homes are sold with seller financing. Seller financing can be the best, cheapest, and easiest way to finance your home purchase because there are no mortgage approval uncertainties or expenses. In most cases, buying a home via seller financing will not show up on your credit report or affect your credit score, and you do not have to worry about being denied as easily. Here then are some more advantages that seller financing can offer both buyers and sellers. Home buyers who are unable to qualify for traditional financing because of their credit score are often able to buy a home through seller financing, which gives the buyer 5 to 10 years to improve credit ratings and reports in hopes of eventually obtaining traditional financing. Even when credit-challenged borrowers can qualify for a traditional loan, the rate they may be offered by traditional lenders can be astronomical. With seller financing, there's no appraisal, no mortgage lender fees, and no loan fees. Missing also are points, origination fees, underwriting charges, credit reports, title insurance, and any junk fees charged by traditional lenders that can amount to thousands of dollars at closing. Despite the elevated purchase price and interest rate with seller financing, buyers do benefit by avoiding some of these loan costs. Because many buyers cannot get funding from a bank, seller financing can open the doors to these prospective customers as well, essentially significantly increasing the pool of potential buyers. Seller financing is also effective when the market is slow and when there are many similar houses on the market. If you are a buyer with less than perfect credit or you just hate to fill out mortgage applications, seller financing is for you. With seller financing, there are no loan applications, no mortgage lender rules, and no ratios. Because sellers are risking default by offering the buyer financing, the seller in turn can charge higher interest rates. For sellers, seller financing is preferable to renting the property out because home sales generally attract a higher caliber of person than do rentals. And with seller financing, there are no landlord or maintenance headaches for the seller either. When seller financing is set up over the life of the seller's original loan, the seller will recoup more than the asking price on the home. In fact, the seller can select the interest rate they want within their state's usury laws. Seller financing allows sellers with significant taxable capital gains for a particular year to take back a seller carryback note and spread their sales proceeds over several years. For more information, sellers are encouraged to speak with a tax advisor. Monthly income secured by a property the seller understands and whose value they know is good. Also, selling property by an installment sale, particularly a wraparound, can net the seller more than if that money had been invested elsewhere. Nothing holds up a sale more than new lender financing. In some areas of the country, it can take months for a buyer to qualify and close a new loan to purchase your property. On the other hand, seller financing allows buyers to close and move into a property within days, since there is no third-party lender holding up the transaction. There are very few assumable loans and few sellers are offering financing. Thus, seller financing makes their house unique. Self-employed people can benefit from seller financing because their income varies widely from year to year, or can't always be verified. Seller financing works for them because it does not require traditional bank income or credit approval. And finally, traditional lenders often won't finance residential properties that lack kitchens or bathrooms. But a motivated seller might finance such a purchase for a builder or a carpenter who can finish the house and then qualify for traditional finance. Now let's take a look at some of the challenges that seller financing can present to both buyers and sellers. If the property is vacant, the seller still has to pay any existing mortgages and other fees. Also, during the loan period, seller still pays property taxes and insurance. Also, if the buyer stops paying and goes into foreclosure, the seller still has to make any underlying loan payments that may exist. Even though home buyers treat their properties better than renters, the home can still be damaged by a buyer, which can affect the seller if the buyer defaults and the seller has to repossess the home. Because the seller has technically sold the home, they no longer have rights to access the home during the loan period. Seller financing is a sales transaction and not a rental transaction. Sellers need to know that they should maintain a certain level of cash flow coming in above the loan amount. If the cash coming in from the buyer and the amount they must pay on the underlying loan are the same, they are not making any profit from the transaction. Sellers also need to ensure that they reserve the ability to assign their promissory note to someone else. The seller also has to worry about and understand usury and predatory lending laws in their state so that they remain in compliance. They should also be aware of and understand their local foreclosure laws. Buyers doing seller financing pay higher interest rates than current bank rates because of their perceived higher level of risk. The costs to the buyer are generally higher on seller finance properties. For starters, the purchase price can be a bit higher due to getting terms. Also, in some cases, the taxes and insurance may not be paid by the seller. Seller financing poses a few unforeseen risks to buyers as well. The buyer has no guarantee that the seller is continuing to pay the underlying loan, taxes, and insurance. So even though the buyer may be current on their payments, the home could be repossessed by the original lender if the seller defaults on any of the underlying loans. Buyers should make sure there are no prepayment penalties on the seller financing in case they want to pay the loan off early. You do not want to pay an extra fee if you can refinance or sell earlier than the loan's end date. Most sellers should want their buyers to be able to pay off their loan early if they can, though there are some cases where sellers prefer that the loan be paid off more slowly.
In this module, you'll learn the nuts and bolts to executing seller financing as the seller. First, we'll cover the steps you as the seller would take if you owned the home you were selling free and clear. Agree with the buyers on a purchase price. As a seller, you want to get a top dollar because you are already offering the buyer terms they can handle, which is why they are resorting to seller financing in the first place. Next, make sure the buyers are creditworthy by pulling prospective buyer credit reports with the buyer's permission, of course. Can they afford the home? If they can't afford it or have shaky job or credit histories, a foreclosure will be much more likely in the future. Proceed with caution and do your due diligence. You then need to agree with the buyer on an interest rate, monthly amount, down payment amount, and length of a loan. Regarding the down payment, you should ask for 10 to 30% down payment to protect yourself in case the buyer forecloses and you have to take the property back. The buyer will also remember how much money he or she has put down if they are in foreclosure and can't make the payments. The more money have to put down, the more they have invested in the property. The possible term lengths for a mortgage are 5, 10, 15, 25, 30, or even 40 years. There are two principal methods: payments over duration of a loan that pay down principal and interest, which is an amortized loan, and interest payments only, with a balloon payment to be made at predetermined times for the payment in full. The interest can be amortized over 30 years with a balloon in 3 or 5 years. Essentially, the buyer is keeping the monthly payment low, offering more money overall to the seller because the buyer will pay more interest in the beginning of the loan and then will need to pay principal when the balloon is due. The buyer just needs to make sure they can refinance within the time frame they need to in order to not breach the contract. If the seller is doing a second position note, then the buyer will need to make sure the first position lender is okay with this. From time to time, lenders will tighten up their loan requirements and will not allow these to be done. Several computer programs will do this for you as well as give you a running total of the amount of interest and principal paid and the remaining balance. You can also search Google or Yahoo for amortization tables or amortization schedules or amortization calculators. Run scenarios on the calculators you find by changing the down payment, purchase amount, interest rate, and terms. The buyer and seller should sign a contract regarding price, loan amount, interest rate, and terms. Each state has many laws regarding real estate sales, contracts, and mortgages, so hire an experienced attorney or closing agent to draft the promissory note and mortgage or deed of trust. Open an escrow account so that the down payment and the monthly payments can be handled and tracked by a third party. This protects both parties' misunderstanding. The buyer can even pay the insurance and taxes from this account too. If the buyer then starts making payments 1 month after the closing date to the escrow account for the contracted amount and term. When the seller financing period is over, the buyer must apply for a mortgage loan for the amount specified in the contract. Failure to do so is breach of contract. Thus, the seller can seek legal action and pursue a foreclosure. Once the buyer is approved for the traditional mortgage amount, they will make a final payment to the seller and become the legal owner of the property when all the paperwork and money has been transferred and recorded accordingly.
Sam Seller owns his home free and clear. He wants to sell his home, but he needs to be careful on how much he makes this year for tax purposes. Plus, he would like to have a monthly cash flow coming in to supplement his income. Bill has $10,000 to put down, but he cannot qualify for traditional financing, so we asked Sam to do seller financing for him. Sam agrees to sell the home for $150,000 with $10,000 down and a monthly payment of $1,100. Bill and Sam come to an agreement, and Bill starts making monthly payments to Sam for $1,100 a month. Sam likes it because his monthly income is supplemented by Bill's payments. It gives him enough to keep the taxes and insurance current, and it helps him not to get hit hard with taxes this year. All in all, Bill gets a home without a traditional loan and a small down payment, and Sam has his needs met too. In a few years, Bill could have better credit and qualify for traditional loan and refinance, thus paying Sam off completely.
To execute seller financing on homes where there is still a mortgage on the property, follow these steps, which are similar to the ones for the free and clear homes. As with the free and clear seller financing, the seller and buyer must create a contract, which should be handled by a real estate attorney that they have both hired. Again, both buyer and seller should agree on a purchase price. The seller needs to determine how much they are willing to finance, the entire loan with only a down payment, or wrap, or a small portion to fill the gap between the buyer's down payment and the amount of their new loan, or the second position, possibly 5% or more. As with free and clear financing, sellers usually ask for 10 to 30% down payment to protect themselves in case the buyer stops making payments and the seller has to foreclose on the loan and take the property back. The same term applies as before. The same two principal methods apply as well with this type of seller financing. Payments over duration of loan pay down principal and interest, or interest payments only, with balloon or principal to be paid at predetermined times for the payment in full. The seller will continue to make payments on their original loan and pay taxes and insurance. It is recommended that this is paid directly from that escrow account, so the buyer can ensure that the underlying mortgage, insurance, and taxes are being paid as necessary. Any remaining amount can go to the seller, but only after all the other bills are paid in full. When the seller financing period is over, the buyer must apply for a mortgage loan for the amount specified in the contract or be able to pay the seller financed loan off in full. Failure to do so is a breach of contract, and the seller could seek legal action and pursue a foreclosure. Once approved for the mortgage loan, the buyer will make a final payment to the seller and become the legal owner of the property.
Here are some tips and cautions on how to do seller financing safely. Getting a large down payment is the most obvious way to be safe, though it is not always possible. Get other security. If buyers want to purchase a property with little down and you like the return you'll get, make the deal safe by putting a mortgage on other property the buyer owns. Cross-collateralization, to be released when they've paid down the balance to a certain level. This mortgage can be placed on another parcel of real estate. Have the buyer pay for a credit report to be run. Bad credit may be okay, but the type of bad credit is important. Unpaid hospital bills that the buyer is disputing are not as relevant as unpaid loans. If you are usually right about people, give some weight to your judgment of their character. Trust a man who felt morally obliged to pay his debts over a playboy that happens to have a decent income at the moment. Consider the whole picture. Suppose a bank will loan 90% and is okay with you taking back a $5,000 second mortgage, allowing the buyer to get in with what cash he has. If you're getting $6,000 more than you expected by accommodating the buyer's needs, where's the loss? You're okay even if he never pays the $5,000. Talk to a lawyer. Maybe in your area it takes 2 years to get a foreclosure on a mortgage through the courts and only 6 months to foreclose on a contract for sale. To properly document a loan, a seller will need to have a promissory note and a deed of trust. In other words, a mortgage, prepared to create a lien against the property being sold. The property sold will be the collateral for the loan and, upon default by the buyer, the property is subject to foreclosure by the seller. As long as a seller retains a lien against the property sold as collateral and the value of the collateral is equal to or greater than the unpaid balance of the seller's note, the risk to the seller is minimal. Loss of a lien or a decrease in collateral value does not mean that a seller will suffer loss, only that the chance of loss is substantially higher. Even without a lien, the buyer's debt to the seller still exists. But with no collateral, the seller will have to sue the buyer, recover a judgment, and locate property which can be taken from the buyer to satisfy the judgment. Also, if the seller's note is secured by a valid first lien against the property, the primary way the seller can lose his lien is to allow ad valorem taxes to go unpaid, resulting in a tax sale of the property. A tax sale, even if tax is accrued after the date of the seller's loan, can terminate the lien, securing the seller's note. Consequently, it is very important for a seller who provides financing to monitor ad valorem taxes to make certain that they are paid. The seller can require the buyer to provide annual evidence that taxes have been paid, or the seller can require that the buyer make monthly deposits with the seller to allow the seller to accumulate funds to pay the taxes when they are due. Loss of value of the collateral can also increase the risk to seller providing financing. There are 2 primary ways to lose collateral value: a loss of economic value due to market conditions, or a major casualty with no insurance coverage. A seller's primary defense against falling property values is to keep the loan-to-value ratio conservative. If a seller loans only 80% of the current market value of the property, the seller will not suffer increased risk of loss unless the value of the collateral decreases by more than 20%. With a loan of 100% of the current market value, any drop in value increases the risk of loss to the seller. Regarding the second reason, a major casualty with no insurance coverage, it is important for a seller to monitor insurance on the collateral property to make certain that the seller is listed as a mortgagee or lose payee, and that insurance coverage is not allowed to lapse. If a seller is listed as a mortgagee on an insurance policy, the insurance company is required to give the seller notice before terminating a policy. An effectively written loan document gives the seller the right to secure insurance on the property and tack the additional cost onto the back of the buyer's loan or bill the buyer separately for this expense. And finally, if the seller agrees to provide secondary financing, the risk to the seller is greater. The increased risk results from the fact that there is a primary first lender whose lien is superior to the second lien retained by the seller. Consequently, in addition to risks associated with a first lien, the seller assumes the risk that the note secured by a superior lien will be paid. If it is not, and the first lender forecloses, the seller could lose the collateral and be left with an unsecured note. The seller can protect their interest in this position by recording a request for notice on the property.
Seller financing is a technique you can use to enter or exit a deal. What do we mean by these terms? By entrance, we mean how you enter a deal and structure it so you can make money and/or meet your investment goals. Often, if you enter a deal incorrectly, you may be very limited on how you can exit it and preserve your profit. By exit, We mean how you successfully exit a deal to ensure that you make money from it. You should go into every deal with at least 2 to 3 ways that you can exit it and still make money. Your exit strategy often dictates your entrance strategy, and sometimes vice versa. When you use seller financing to get into a deal, you control a property for a small amount down, plus monthly payments without bank involvement. Here are some times when you may want to enter a deal using seller financing. When you have little or no money to purchase a property. When you have a hard time acquiring conventional financing. When you do not have good credit. When you do not have money or a credit partner, and when you want to sell the property quickly or fix up and sell quickly. Sometimes you have a property that you need to sell, but there may be circumstances that make it harder to sell it the traditional way. On the screen are listed times when you may want to use seller financing to exit a deal. Please take a moment to look them over and note those reasons. Sometimes sellers offer what is called a second position lien or second to buyers. Essentially, a second is a lien attached to the property after a first position lien. In seller financing, seconds are usually supplementary financing, a small amount of money lent by the seller to the buyer that will go toward the full purchase price of the property. Seconds are generally a smaller amount than the first mortgage and will have a higher interest rate and possibly require more money down. Here is a simple illustration about how seconds work. For example, Sam seller sells his home to Bill buyer for $150,000. Bill can obtain a loan for 80% of the $150,000, aka $120,000 from ABC Lending. That leaves $30,000 for Bill to come up with to buy the home from Sam. Bill does not have $30,000, but he does have $15,000. So Sam agrees to carry back the remaining $15,000 as a second position lien on the property. Sam gets his home sold and receives a monthly cash flow from Bill over the term of the $15,000 second loan. When they are at the closing table, Bill now has 2 separate sets of loan documents to sign. The first set is for ABC Lending and the second set is for the loan with Sam. The closing agent will record these documents at the courthouse against the property Bill just bought. ABC Lending, as most lenders prefer, requires their lien or security instrument to be filed in first lien position. Thus, Sam's lien or security instrument is filed in second position. That is where it gets its name from. In the case of default, ABC Lending is now first in line to be paid off, and then Sam will get what is left over. Wrap, wraparound, wraparound mortgage, or all-inclusive trust deed are terms for the same general technique. A wrap is similar to a second, except the seller's original loan stays in place and a new loan between the seller and buyer wraps around the seller's existing financing. This can be a great way for a buyer to get into a property without having to acquire new financing through a traditional lender. It offers the seller a way to sell their home and receive an ongoing monthly cash flow, as well as cover their underlying or existing loan on the property. One word of caution. Traditional lenders often have a due-on-sale clause in their loans. Therefore, if a lender with such a clause perceives that the property has been sold or transferred from one party to another, then they have the right to call their loan due in full immediately. Keep in mind, if the payments are current and paid on time and the insurance provider does not change, most lenders won't know or could care less what you do as long as they are getting their money. Please note, this due-on-sale clause is a clause in a contract. It is not the law, so lenders have the right to call the contract due if they so choose, but you are not breaking the law. They have these clauses in place to ensure that they know who is making the payment to them and to prevent the loans from being assumable. If you are considering doing wraps, seek legal advice from a well-versed real estate attorney who does these on a regular basis. Let's look at a brief real-life example of a wrap. Sam seller sells his home for $150,000 to Bill buyer. Sam has a mortgage with JCW Loans for $95,000 with a monthly mortgage payment of $900. Bill agrees to do a wrap with Sam for $140,000 and requires that Bill pay $10,000 down payment and pay a monthly payment of $1,100 a month. Now, Sam has his $900 taken care of each month, plus a profit of $200. To protect their deal, they have set up an escrow account that Bill makes his $1,100 a month payment to. They pay the $900 payment to JCW Loans and deposit the rest in Sam's bank account. Sam does not have to worry about making the payment or collecting a payment from Bill. Bill does not have to worry about Sam not paying the underlying mortgage, taxes, or insurance.
When you are considering seller financing, you need to know who are your typical buyers and sellers. In other words, you need to know their profiles. Let's start by looking at a typical seller's profile. Before you enter seller financing as a buyer, you need to understand what might motivate a seller to offer it. Knowing this will help you sift more quickly through possible seller leads and obtain screened seller financing candidates more quickly. The following are some reasons that sellers provide seller financing. Take a moment to look them over before proceeding to the next slide.
Now take a look at a typical buyer's profile. When you as the seller understand who your buyers are, you can focus your marketing efforts in areas where they live and target the characteristics they are looking for. Knowing your potential buyers will help you narrow down which properties you yourself should buy for future resale as well. The ideal buyer's profile you should focus on most often includes the items shown on the screen. Take a moment to look them over before proceeding to the next slide.
The third profile you need to look at is of properties for sale. Some properties are better suited, in other words, less risky, for seller financing than others. You can obtain seller financing on any property type, but we recommend sticking with the property characteristics identified in the list shown on the screen. Please note that while the list recommends only single-family residences, in some markets, you may consider using seller financing to buy townhomes, condos, and manufactured homes. Just remember that you must know how you are going to exit before using seller financing to get into it. Again, take a moment to review the list before advancing to the next slide.
Because few homes are ever listed for sale with seller financing, you may need to market to sellers, buyers, and even agents to find people willing to enter into a seller financing deal. This is partly because most real estate agents assume buyers will make all-cash purchase offers, and few sellers even know that seller financing is an option. As just mentioned, one group you should contact are sellers. Here is a list of sellers who might more easily be persuaded to provide seller financing. The best candidates for seller financing are sellers whose homes are free and clear with no mortgage, or a small one. Almost 50% of U.S. homes have no mortgages. Other alternatives are homes for sale with assumable first mortgages, such as older VA homes, where the seller can then carry back a second mortgage to fill the finance gap. Elderly home sellers often need additional retirement income. Typically, they're hoping for a cash sale so they can invest the proceeds at the bank, perhaps earning 5 to 6% interest. If you offer these sellers a mortgage at 7 or 8% interest, you look like a hero because they didn't know they could safely earn such high yields on a tangible asset that they're already familiar with. Other motivated sellers who might carry back a mortgage include those who own vacant houses that have been listed at least 60 days and/or that are in less than perfect condition. Fixer-upper homes appeal to only a few buyers and can be hard to finance with new traditional loans. So your offer to buy if they provide seller financing might be especially welcome. And finally, it might be hard to believe, but some people in pre-foreclosure are not motivated to sell. Why? They are in denial of their current situation. Once reality hits, however, they can be motivated to do something and quickly. If they are not far behind in their payments, and it is early enough in the foreclosure process and the numbers make sense, you can agree to bring the payments current and then have them do seller financing for you. Obviously, they are going to have to move, as it is not in your best interest to have them remain in the home. In fact, in some areas, it is actually a violation of the law if they remain in the home. By providing seller financing, you are helping them bring their home out of foreclosure, saving their credit, and giving them the income to show they could qualify for another home loan or get into an apartment. By selling to you, they did not lose their home nor any equity they had in the property. In fact, if you finance it with them for long enough, they will actually make more money over time on the sale of their home than they would have with a typical cash-out purchase.
There are several ways you can find motivated sellers who will do seller financing for you. First, after you determine a marketing budget and plan as discussed in the business setup and marketing lesson, you can place general ads online and in newspapers, or you can send direct mail pieces out, such as postcards, flyers, brochures, letters, etc. In your general ads and in your direct marketing, use the following keywords and phrases. As with any business, sometimes the best advertising happens by word of mouth. Quickly review the following list of people to notify that you are looking to purchase from a seller financer. Of course, some sellers are easy to find because they're trying to find you. Look for the following keywords and phrases in real estate ads to find sellers who could be motivated to provide seller financing. For more information on how to market to find sellers, view the seller list lesson in the marketing course.
Once you have found a potential seller, or you find a house that is a great seller financing candidate, you need to learn the seller's true motivation. Note, don't let real estate agents discourage you from making a seller financing offer. Of course, if you learn the seller needs lots of cash, such as in a divorce, that house or condo might not be appropriate for seller financing. Here are some questions to determine a seller's motivation. Take a moment to review them before proceeding to the next slide.
For most real estate investors, the ultimate question is, how am I going to find a buyer for this property? The typical response is that question for most investors is centered around advertising the property, putting up signs, holding an open house, using classified ads in the local newspaper or online, websites, and so on, and maybe even listing it with an agent who can enter the listing on the MLS. But if signs, advertising, and open houses were all that was needed to market property, wouldn't all properties soon be sold? Obviously, there's something more sometimes. To attract a larger number of prospective buyers, you can add the keywords shown on the screen to your property sale ads. Please note that the phrase, owner will carry, sets your property apart from sellers who are waiting for that elusive all-cash buyer. Adding these words can be the quickest way to change a for sale sign into a sold sign in a buyer's market. Also, in the cash flow buyers list lesson of the marketing course, you learn how to market to find these buyers and maintain a buyer's list to continuously pull from to keep a high occupancy on your properties with an ongoing cash flow stream.
Many sellers think they need all cash when they sell their property, and many real estate agents think they need an all-cash sale. This is understandable because a cash transaction is simple and doesn't require anyone to be creative. But during economic downturns, buying and selling real estate gets more difficult, so your job sometimes must be to convince both sellers and agents to do a seller finance deal. You need to overcome their fears by educating them about how seller financing works, how it can benefit them, and how to structure the deal to make it viable for them and you. They might also fear foreclosure if the buyer's payments are not received on time. However, foreclosure can in some cases benefit a seller who will then either get paid in full at the foreclosure sale or get the house back to sell again for a second profit. Most sellers and agents never considered seller financing, because they simply do not know that it exists or it is a viable option. Once you have them interested in doing seller financing, you can show them how it can benefit them financially. You can show them how much more they can ask for their home and get over the time they are offered financing. You can show them how much they will earn in interest over time and how it will compare to a CD or other investment. Once you have their attention that way, you will want to know what their needs are. How much do they need down? How much per month? What interest rate? And how long are they willing to wait for their money? It is in your best interest to ask for a long-term mortgage, such as 20, 25, or even 30 years. If the seller wants a shorter term, suggest a 30-year amortized mortgage with a balloon payment due at the seller's option in 10 years. It will keep your monthly payments down in a reasonable range and offer you more options for exiting the deal, such as renting or lease optioning the property to someone else who will pay your mortgage. If they are still hesitant, you can reassure reluctant home sellers using 3 techniques. Offer to repay 6 to 12 months of mortgage payments instead of a big down payment at closing, but only if you are planning on holding onto the property for a long time. Present the sellers with 2 to 4 scenarios outlined and the profit they could receive from each. They will quickly see that they are making less money by selling the property outright. Accompany your real estate agent to present your seller financed offer so the sellers can meet you.
There are various contracts associated with seller financing. You will want to modify the terms and conditions of your contracts depending upon which side of the financing you are on. If you are buying a property via seller financing, obviously you want the terms slanted in your favor, and likewise when you are acting as the lender. This module discusses the issues to keep in mind when you are on either side of seller financing. The purchase and sale contract is a bilateral agreement between the seller and the buyer, where both parties are obligated to execute the agreement. Usually, all repairs are buyer's responsibilities, and 2 contracts are used to set up the seller financing. With a promissory note and security instrument, the property is sold to the buyer, so foreclosure is required if buyer stops paying. The contract should also stipulate that the owner or seller continues to pay insurance and taxes on the property. For more detailed information on the contracts and the way you should structure them depending on your role, please see the Seller Financing Guide. Seller financing has tax advantages for the seller. In an installment sale, which is usually how seller finance deals are worked out, at least one payment of the purchase price will be received after the close of the year when the sale occurs. Because of this, the taxpayer, in this case the seller, is able to defer payment of income taxes that are assessed on that gain. Each installment payment usually consists of 3 elements: a partial return of the seller's basis in the property sold, a portion of the taxpayer's realized gain on the sale, and accrued interest. Each year, the taxpayer must determine the amount of installment sale gain that must be included in the taxpayer's income for that year by multiplying the total payments received in that year by the gross profit ratio for the sale. The gross profit ratio of an installment sale is the taxpayer's total anticipated gross profit divided by the total contract price. The anticipated gross profit is calculated as the contract price minus the taxpayer adjusted basis in the property. For more detailed information on the gross profit, please refer to the Seller Financing Guide. Although use of the installment method affects the timing of the recognition of gain from an installment sale, the installment method rules do not affect the characterization of the gain as either capital gain or ordinary income. The character of the gain in each of the taxable years depends on the nature of the property sold. the amount of accumulated depreciation taken in prior tax years, and the seller's holding period for the property.
In each lesson, we'd like to leave you with some action items, things we want you to do before the next lesson. So please do or be able to do the following before your next lesson. Evaluate your 4 target areas and determine feasibility for seller financing. If no areas are feasible, do more research and find a new target area where seller financing will work. If you're going to offer seller financing to buyers, then please do the following. Find out the average rent amount in your area. Find out where your buyers are going to come from. Follow up with your buyers list regularly. Acquire and review blank mortgages or deeds of trust and promissory notes. Understand usury and foreclosure laws for your area. Have an attorney assist in modifications to agreements and ask the buyer questions to determine the buyer needs. Now, if you want sellers to do seller financing for you, then please do the following. Identify sellers who would do seller financing with you. Ask the seller questions to determine the seller's needs. Understand usury and foreclosure laws for your area. Have an attorney assist in modifications to agreements. Visit, evaluate, and present offers on at least 5 properties a week. Review your marketing budget and plan. Evaluate, choose, and implement a marketing approach to use to find sellers and buyers. And make a list of buyers and sellers as appropriate for your entrance and exit strategy.